The Joe Rogan Experience.
Let's talk about endurance. So there are different aspects to endurance. And so there's cardio, and there's the peripheral endurance in the muscles, muscular endurance. So first, let's discuss how do we develop cardio. Let's discuss how we develop endurance in the muscle. The best, the healthiest way to develop your cardio is just steady state exercise, like running at a particular speed that's not too fast. That's very simple.
That's the best way to develop cardio.
For most people it is. And so here's what's happening. What's happening is the heart is stretching. When you increase your heart rate up to a certain point, the heart starts stretching more. And it stretches more and more. So that increases the stroke volume. So pretty much you get a bigger heart. And that's good. That works up to not quite 90% of heart rate. When you start redlining your heart rate, when you start getting to 90% and higher, the heart does not have time to relax fully. So it really pretty much is twitching. So you're no longer really stretching that heart. So you want to be training at the metabolic intensity that's much lower, something we can pretty much sustain a conversation. So like say you're running and talking to your body.
That's what you want to stay to develop endurance.
To stretch your heart. That's the basic method. So that's one method. So the second method is interval training. And the interval training for the heart was developed by Germans decades ago, and these guidelines still stand. So here's what they figured out. They figured out that we know that these various systems in your body have inertia. So for instance, notice that when you're running hard and you stopped, your heart's still beating hard, and then maybe 10 seconds after, there's a sudden drop right there. So there's that inertia. So the Germans figured out if you get your heart rate up to about 85, 90%, which is, it's hard, but it's still not maximal. And then you switch to walking or jogging, so the heart is still beating, and so this extra volume of blood is moving, and it stretches the heart. So it works really well. So you can use the interval method as well, but it was found it's used best after a period of steady state training. It's very demanding on the body, and it's too easy to have problems with the heart if you start using it prematurely. Then there's also such a thing as high heart rate under heavy loads. So in this particular case, we're talking about dynamic exercises. So what's dynamic exercise? Running, bicycling, skiing, even light kettlebell swings. That's dynamic exercise. When you start doing static exercise, let's say you're trying to do squats, heavy squats, for, to get your cardio, so to say. That's not the best idea, because that interferes with the blood flow. It's something called afterload versus preload. The heart gets thicker instead of the heart gets stretched and bigger. So it's not the optimal way to train the heart. You can, again, this simple way you can use dynamic exercise and interval type training, or repeat training in this case, to train your heart, is to do an exercise that's dynamic in nature, to raise your heart rate to about, let's say, 80-90%, which would be 80-90%. It would be where you can say maybe a couple words. You're not dying yet. You can still answer a question, and then you just walk around, and you do it again. So that's a simple way of doing it.
How much time walking around?
That depends. That totally depends on who you are.
Depends on how fast your heart rate drops back down. And what do you want to, is there a number? Do you want to keep it in the 140s, the 150s? Is it dependent upon your age?
Okay, in this particular case, you would drop it down. The original guidelines were done for young people, those 120, 130 beats. So you're talking about 60-65%. And pretty much, if you're just looking at being able to pass the talk test, which means you can talk, short sentences.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak in short, something like that, right? So, for example, you do a set of 10 swings, really powerful with the kettlebell. walk around a little bit. When you feel that you can speak again, you do it again. So that's a simple way of doing that. But the heart is only a very small part of endurance. So we definitely need to do some cardio for our health, and athletes definitely need to do it for their performance. But what we really need to focus on is you need mitochondria. So mitochondria in the muscle cell. So that's where energy is being converted aerobically, which means efficiently. So if you look at the way your muscle uses energy, so you will get this energy with food, converted, it goes down. Eventually, the final currency, so to say, is something called ATP. But it's only used, you only have it for a few seconds. So it has to be reloaded. So we have three main energy systems. So we have the creatine phosphate system. It's very powerful, but it's only can do, go for just some seconds. And it's clean burning. We have aerobic system that's not powerful at all, but it's longer lasting. And we have the glycolytic system that's kind of in between that dumps a lot of acid and other fatigue metabolites in there. So what we want to do is we want to develop these mitochondria in our muscles. It's easy to do in slow fibers, and it's a little more involved in fast fibers. I'll tell you how we can do that, but it can be done. So what we're looking for, instead of trying to trash the muscle with acid, we are trying to train in a way that to produce less acid. And then only before the competition, right before the competition, a couple of weeks out, you do a couple of kind of smokers like that to get yourself used to that thing. So the way we develop mitochondria, which means make your muscle oxidative, make your muscle enduring and not polluting. In slow fibers, it's simply moving right below anaerobic threshold. So anaerobic threshold, it's that intensity at which acid is accumulating just up to a certain point and stays at that steady state, and you can keep disposing of that for quite a while. As soon as you go above it, very rapidly, you crash. So running right below the anaerobic threshold is the primary training method for endurance athletes. And how do you know that you ran the threshold? When you fail in the talk test. That's a simple way to do that. And it's very interesting that endurance athletes, even though who are not necessarily well educated, they kind of tend to gravitate toward that intensity. And so what happens is we are producing just small amounts of acid, and the body finally is able to, produce less and less. So that's how we train that's how we train mitochondria in slow fibers. For fast fibers, it becomes something more interesting. So the conditions for making the mitochondria be able to handle more traffic without producing as much acid is push them just to the edge of acidosis, just to the edge, and do it over and over and over. So Professor Verkhoshansky, back in the 80s, figured out that's the guy who invented plyometrics and so on. So he figured out, so here's what we do. Imagine that you are sprinting. Let's say you're sprinting for 5-7 seconds. And then you're just walking. And you're sprinting again. And you're just walking. But you're doing that, you're measuring your blood lactate, and it still keeps below the threshold. And you sustain that for, let's say, 40 minutes. So think of this for a second. So you're sprinting very intensely, but you stop before you start burning. You get to the point of just light muscular fatigue, and you do it over and over and over. So if we talk about the coaching terminology, it's repeat training versus interval training. So what is interval training? Pardon me, Joe, I have to take a step to the side. So there are 3 types of rest periods between your sets, whether you're running, lifting, whatever. So there's the stress period. That means that you will have a harder time to do the same thing or you will not be able to repeat it, right? That's interval training. There is the supercompensation period, which means if you wait extra long time, you'll perform even better. Like, for example, if you do a set of pull-ups, wait for 15 minutes, you might be able to do more 15 minutes later. And there is the ordinary period, which is that you'll be able to repeat it over and over. So that's, in coaching speak, it's called repeat training. Repeat versus interval. So we're trying to sustain that same level of performance for 40 minutes, let's say. So that's an example of how we develop mitochondria and fast-twitch fibers. And the same thing we can do with kettlebell swings, the same thing you can do working in a heavy bag, and so on and so forth.